sometimes that burnout and that overwhelm might cloud your ability to be able to really connect with others, to instill leadership in others, and for you to show up that way. So I think that it's really important that we do address the leadership of a highly sensitive entrepreneur, because, you get to be leaders too, and it's important that you be leaders within your community. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Power in the Pause podcast. How are you doing today? As a reminder, it would mean the world to me if you would please leave me a 5-star review, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you do not miss a single episode. And I want to thank you for joining me in today's episode, because I am here with none other than Heather Dominick. Hello, Heather. How are you?
I am great. I'm so excited.
Me too. I am really, really looking forward to our conversation today about how it is that you have shifted from burnout to success as a highly sensitive entrepreneur. And I don't know about you guys, but I am dying to know exactly what that means. So before we dive in, I want to share a little bit about you with our audience today. So Heather is the author of Different, the Highly Sensitive Leadership Revolution, which is both highly sensitive and highly successful. And for more than a decade, she has trained and mentored highly sensitive entrepreneurs and leaders so they're able to work less while making more impact and income. I mean, hello, sign me up. And that's exactly what my motto is too, Heather. It's all about working less and making more money and ensuring that your impact is even greater than both of those things. So I would love for you to please share with our audience today about your journey of embracing your high sensitivity as an entrepreneur, and how that unique trait has really shaped your ability to create business strategy and to make some really life-changing decisions for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Amazing. Again, so excited about this conversation. So let's see how much of a nutshell I can bring everything into. So 2024 marks my 21st year of being self-employed.
Wow.
I know.
Good for you.
Amazing. And so I share that because when I first started my business, I actually did not know that I was a highly sensitive person. I had never even heard about highly sensitive people, what that was, what that meant. And so those first years of being in business, I would say probably the first 6 to 8 years, I was massively, again, unknowingly working against my natural traits and tendencies, and really bought into the whole hustle culture, which still prevails today, but it was definitely even more so when I started out 20 years ago, and especially for women who were coming into being self-employed at that time, and kind of also really around the birth of using the internet and marketing. I know that sounds crazy, but I always like to kind of mark the start of my self-employed journey by remembering that YouTube did not exist. So
I remember those days too. I mean, I literally switched from network radio, selling network radio, to selling digital when the whole banner ad came into existence.
Oh my
so
God,
I'm
yes.
with you, girl.
The banner ad, totally. So to just say that I just was really caught up in a different mindset of what it took to be able to succeed as being self-employed. All to say that about that 6 to 8 year mark, I absolutely hit a dark night of the soul. I was majorly burned out. On paper, I was actually looking very successful. I had brought my business across the 7-figure mark for the first time, and I was doing all of the things right. But off paper, I was massively burned out. I was overwhelmed. I was overworked. I was overexhausted. And weirdly enough, it was also my lowest net year ever, even though I had on paper generated more income than I had ever generated before. So all of that really plunged me into a very, very internal place. And again, I can look back and say, absolutely a dark night of the soul. What came out of that, as often does with the dark night of the soul, was a greater understanding and knowing about who I am, including discovering that I was a highly sensitive person. And that really pivotively, is that a word? That really
It is now.
absolutely definitively, I am known for making up words, but that absolutely definitively changed everything. And I completely started going about being in business differently, and then began, coaching and mentoring other highly sensitives to do the same. And it's been over a decade now.
Amazing. And I'm curious to know, because, your experience in hitting that 7-figure mark, and having this experience, as you're calling it, the dark night of the soul. I'm curious, like, what the realizations were that prompted you to sort of reassess not just your business, but also your approach.
Absolutely. So it really was a combination of just literally physically being drained and exhausted, and not really having any sense of inspiration or motivation. And I am a teacher at heart. That was literally my former career, was as a high school teacher. And I could even look back and, I was like playing teacher, like for fun, like when I was like 7 and 8. And, so I am a teacher at heart. And that really broke me, that I was having difficulty just really being able to motivate, to be able to, share and support, teach, coach, mentor others. And then that combined with actually looking at the numbers at the end of that year, which was 2009, and like having a small of like, what the hell? Like, what? Like, what is all of this for? And if I'm not doing this, then what am I doing? And it was really, really tossed me into a space of deep, deep self-inquiry. I remember I unplugged from everything except serving and supporting my clients. And as a part of that, was again able to really come to a very, very clear understanding about what needed to change, and learning that a highly sensitive person was a big part of it.
So interesting and brave. That's the word. Courage is what comes to mind hearing, you talk about this in your story. And I'd love for you to go deeper into and define for us, like, what is a highly sensitive entrepreneur? How can somebody listening go, oh, maybe that's me? Like, what's the definition? I'm all about definitions, but if you could expand and educate, I always say educate us about what that is.
Yes. Absolutely. So first and foremost, a highly sensitive person comes out of research primarily from the mid-1990s. And at that time, there was a bit of a movement around the research that identified that, not everyone's nervous system is wired exactly the same. There's one researcher and author who's most well known for that work because she wrote the book, The Highly Sensitive Person. Her name is Dr. Elaine Aron. And through her work, and again, other researchers as well, they were able to identify that there's basically 20% of the population who are born into the world with a nervous system that's wired to take in stimulation at a much higher degree than someone who's not highly sensitive. So that sense of overstimulation can connect to all of the 6 senses. You can think sight, sound, smell, also energy, also information, also emotions. If you're a person who's highly sensitive, you tend to feel things more deeply because of that overstimulation. When you are, I like to say my language is untrained as a highly sensitive person, the world can feel very, very overwhelming. When you are trained to learn how to work with your nervous system, it can really become an absolute superpower tool. So the work that I do is I build off of the research from the mid 1990s for people who are highly sensitive, who really feel a call to use so much of what the sensitivity brings to us as traits as a part of being in a service-based business. So how can you use this gift that you've been given? You feel the call to really be able to help people, but find so much of what is just naturally overwhelming when it comes to being an entrepreneur, whether you're highly sensitive or not. And that's where the work that I do comes in.
It's so fascinating to me. And I can only imagine that there's people listening going, oh my God, I finally understand why, right? Like, I understand why I burned out so quickly. I understand why maybe other people are saying like they've had their own experience having a dark night of the soul. I'm curious to know, like, since having learned this and really diving headfirst into, making this a priority for yourself and your business, training other coaches to become experts in this particular arena, like, how has this really helped to accelerate your sense of purpose in your life and in your business, and sort of like the impact that you've been able to make, not just for yourself, but for so many other people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I'll speak to what you mentioned in regards to like, this maybe is why I do feel like I burn out more quickly. And that was definitely my experience when I learned that I was a highly sensitive person, because I would look around me and be like, why does everyone else kind of seem really like excited by these like big, loud conferences and not totally like drained and worn out? Or why does somebody else, why can they do like 3 speaking engagements in a day? And I end up in the bathtub for 4 hours with a washcloth over my eyes and a migraine. Like, so just to say that being that as a person who's highly sensitive, that we are only 20%, it is an imbalance to the other 80%. So there can really be that experience of not only feeling different, which is the title of my book, as you mentioned, but feeling weird and like there's something wrong with you. So I share all of that to say that, when I began making the changes for myself and then began sharing it with others, it really drove home that particular aspect of the purpose. So yes, there's all of the tools and the teachings and the trainings that I've developed that, support with how to manage yourself as a highly sensitive person, or how to set up operation systems for yourself as a highly sensitive person. But really at the heart of it is to heal that part of oneself that has felt broken. Mm-hmm. So that part of yourself that you felt like, oh, I have to hide this from other people, because if I let them know, or if they find out, they'll really discover how truly flawed I am. Mm-hmm. And to really be able to flip that script into a place of empowerment and a place of recognition of a very exceptional and special trait that comes with very exceptional and special capabilities, and how to be able to use that to be of service to others. So, you mentioned coaches, but members that we have in the Business Miracles community are actually in an array of businesses. We have real estate brokers, we have dentists, we have insurance brokers, we have teachers, we have principals, we have, coaches, and we have photographers. So it's a wide array of people who are like, I know that I have something to offer. I feel this call, and to be able to do it without, again, just feeling like I'm too broken to be able to do what I've been brought here to do.
Right. And I love that, everybody listening can hear that like this affects people across multiple industries. And again, like unless you know what this is, I would imagine that up until this point, until you discovered this, that, you weren't necessarily as efficient and you were, as you call it, the burnout. I mean, I'd love to go a little bit deeper into some specific strategies or practices that you've implemented or that you have seen success, not just for yourself, but also with your clients to really be able to maintain that sense of balance, considering the challenges that you experience as someone who is highly sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Well, going back to that period before understanding that I was highly sensitive, I was just doing all the things that were being taught, right? In terms of like how to manage your time or like how to go about marketing or, how to be able to work with team. But it really then brings it back to that 20% versus 80%. So it just makes sense that the majority of what is being taught is for people who are not highly sensitive. Right. So it's kind of like if you're a chocolate ice cream eater, but then you've been like eating vanilla like all of your life, right? And you're like, oh, that just doesn't really sit well with me. And then suddenly you taste chocolate and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is where the world is, right? So it was that aspect that really led to the burnout. And since then, as part of my work, I've done research around what I refer to as the highly sensitive entrepreneur coping mechanisms, which are coping techniques that we develop as people who are highly sensitive to try to fit in with those who are not highly sensitive. One of those coping mechanisms is what I refer to as being a pusher, where you will just push through and you will get done what the other 80% gets done, but it will come at an extremely high cost. And typically in regards to one's health and or one's relationships. And that was definitely me. And I am 100% a recovering pusher. So when it comes to those techniques, it's about like, okay, creating the opposite to that coping mechanism. So if you tend towards the pushing coping mechanism, then we want to actually look at ways of, say, setting up your schedule that support you in not being triggered into that coping mechanism. However, one of the other coping mechanisms is being a hider, where because as a person who's highly sensitive, you're so concerned about becoming overwhelmed that you will set up all different types of like plots and ploys to keep yourself from being overwhelmed. So that typically is like the entrepreneur who has like the most beautiful website. They have like the most incredible programs created and nobody's in them. Right. And they're finding all these like, oh, no. Like before I actually have a selling conversation, I have to like create like one more module, right? Or something that will support that highly sensitive and being able to stay hidden. So then we create systems that counter that tendency into the trigger of hiding. So it's not just like, oh, over here is the highly sensitive entrepreneur toolbox, and here's the non-highly sensitive entrepreneur toolbox. It's really more of like, I teach how to know yourself, know your shadow tendencies, know your coping mechanism tendencies, and then begin to approach marketing, selling, and operations in a way that's, again, going to support being able to stay connected to your strengths rather than getting triggered into that coping behavior.
So brilliant. And I'm curious to know, how does this work when, dealing with a challenge like a criticism or a setback? So what practices do you implement in those types of situations, or that have been proven to be effective to maintain that emotional well-being during those times?
Yeah, I so appreciate that question, because going back to being untrained as a highly sensitive versus being trained, if you really boil it down, it comes to shifting from taking things personally to taking personal responsibility.
Oh,
and so I teach tools that I refer to as energy management. And I teach how to use those tools as an ongoing core practice. So not just when you find yourself overwhelmed or overstimulated, but to use energy management as an ongoing, like non-negotiable, support yourself every single day in strengthening the tendency to shift more towards that personal responsibility as a nervous system response versus taking things personally. So that when that moment comes, because it will come, where you do receive not so great feedback, or you do receive criticism, or someone doesn't enroll in your programs, or someone has something to say about you that you find difficult to digest, or just a difficult conversation, right? Which is just all part of life, but definitely part of, being an entrepreneur. That you, because you've been engaged in core practice and using these tools consistently, you will have a bit more leeway and space in terms of, rather than the nervous system going into an automatic overprotection reaction, that you will be able to remain more connected and grounded. Your nervous system does not flood, and you can access more of your strengths as a highly sensitive, such as your intuition, such as your empathy, such as your ability to be a deep listener. And then you can use those strengths, because you have access to them, in order to be able to respond, right? Or to even self-manage any type of, again, criticism, feedback, or something that could potentially be triggering.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And what I'm hearing you say ultimately is that it helps to influence how it is that you show up as a leader, right? The way that you're able to embody leadership, whether that's with your clients or with your staff or your team. And so really in your experience, how has knowing that you're a highly sensitive entrepreneur impacted your ability to show up as a leader and to be able to also foster a supportive and empathetic work environment?
I really appreciate that you made the connection to leadership, because often, it just creates kind of like a cross-eyed reaction for most people. It's like, wait, like highly sensitive, but also a leader? Like what? Like how do those two things go together? And one, I like to kind of redefine, like going back to our love of definitions, I like to redefine leadership and bringing it first to, for some highly sensitives, it's really just about leadership of self, right? And to feel that one has an ability to lead within how they move throughout their day-to-day in their business and in their life. For others, sometimes it's also about leadership within family, with not being the highly sensitive who is responsible for absorbing everyone in the household's feelings or emotions, or having to be the one to constantly be managing that for everybody, as well as then extending it out to being the leader of your business and or as part of that, a team or a staff. And so from there, then to go into what's often, taught within leadership theory as like the four styles of leadership, right? So we tend to often just stereotypically still identify leadership as power over. But the four quadrants speak about power with,
right,
and power to, and power within.
right.
And those three we really excel at as highly sensitives when we're operating from our strengths.
Yeah, I love that. I'm all about leadership. I mean, I don't care who it is that you are. We all have the ability to show up as leaders. Yes, 100%. So much so, I mean, people who've listened to my prior podcast know, like, I took a leadership course. It was a 6-month, like, all intensive. It was the most incredible 6 months of my life. I learned so much about not just my leadership style, but also it helps you to identify other people. So you know how to shape shift to be able to interact with people. And I think that even as somebody who is, well, what I've learned from our conversation in the last, 20, 25 minutes is that you probably have to look at it from a very different lens, because so much of your ability to connect and collaborate with other people depends on you recognizing, other people's strengths. And sometimes, I mean, what I would imagine is that sometimes that burnout and that overwhelm might cloud your ability to be able to really connect with others, to instill leadership in others, and for you to show up that way. So I think that it's really important that we do address the leadership of a highly sensitive entrepreneur, because, you get to be leaders too. And it's important that you be leaders within your community, because if, which is how I see you, candidly. I mean, that's why, again, like, I did this, I feel like we could talk for an hour. I'm so fascinated by what it is that you do and this arena. And it's interesting because I'm even thinking about a couple of my friends, and I'm like, I wonder, like, I kind of am wondering if they know about this or not, because I from what you've talked about today, I'm like totally putting them in contact with you, because I'm like, oh my God, there's like, they need to know about this, because, again, like, unless you're aware, unless you're educated, unless like, I can only imagine the beat up that people are creating for themselves when they don't have to. So with that said, and drawing from your extensive experience, I mean, what insights or advice would you offer to fellow entrepreneurs who are, other highly sensitive individuals who may be, struggling with burnout, struggling with, navigating their own version of a dark night of the soul? Like, what would you say to them in terms of being able to prioritize their well-being and how to do that in combination with pursuing their business goals?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'll say we are 1 in 5. So most likely, right, there's a highly sensitive, right?
We all probably know somebody, right? Like,
exactly.
100%.
Yes, exactly. So, and if, as you're listening, you have a sense of like, oh, either, yes, I've known that I'm highly sensitive, but I've kind of wanted to ignore it, or, oh, I have a sense that I might be highly sensitive, but I'm not so sure, or, I know that I'm highly sensitive, but I kind of like inspired or intrigued about like, oh, how can I work with this a little bit better? First thing I would say is like, just find out for sure. Right? Like, take the assessment, whether it's the one that I have on my website or Dr. Elaine Aaron or what have you, and just get a sense of like, is that me? And then from there, it's about beginning the process of embracing this part of yourself. I would say actually even first, it's like starting to just get to know a little bit more about this part of yourself, and then really beginning to embrace it and begin to explore in a committed way different aspects of how you can begin to go about things differently. It doesn't have to be like this, huge total, disruption change, but maybe it's I just shift this a little bit about the way that I set up my schedule. Or maybe I just shift this a little bit about the way that I approach conversations. Or maybe I just change this a little bit to prepare myself before going into a large output of energy. And, begin to incrementally make these shifts and changes and adjustments, all simply to just really just honor who you are. And as you do that, then you really will begin to see, and this is just what I see with my community members and clients over time, it starts to change things. And then you really start to have a different experience. And, it definitely in the way that you work, but as part of that, what I hear and see all the time is about the way that we create. Because creativity is really one of our strengths as highly sensitives when we're not working against how we just need to operate in terms of our nervous system. So you get to create differently in a way that just brings more sense of like inspiration and joy. And then you get to relate differently. So it doesn't feel like there's necessarily such an impact through just, everyday exchanges, whether it be family or friends and, definitely clients, and that, also extends to team, et cetera. So get to know yourself, right? Know for sure, get to know yourself, embrace it, and then small changes over time.
So valuable. And I mean, Heather, I learned so much today. Like I said, I feel like I have like a million questions that I want to ask you. So you may be coming back. I'm just warning you because I just think that's so fascinating. And, those of you guys listening, Heather, you mentioned your highly sensitive entrepreneur assessment. And I know that is your gift today to all of our listeners. So I really encourage everybody listening to go check this out. So if you could share that, and also how people can find you, connect with you, you are like a diamond in the rough. This is so more people need to know about this. So how can people find you?
Thank you so much. So first of all, the assessment, you can find that at www.hsequiz.com, hsequiz.com, but it really is an assessment. So it's not pass or fail. hsequiz.com is just an easier URL. And when you take the assessment, you'll find out if you are a somewhat of a highly sensitive entrepreneur or a super highly sensitive entrepreneur, or if you're like me and you're a super uber highly sensitive entrepreneur. And wherever you fall within that assessment range, you'll then receive a free success guide that will support you in that getting to know and that embracing and starting to take those incremental over time steps. So I definitely recommend it. Or even if you've been listening and you're like, oh, I think somebody I might know, or definitely if it's somebody on my team, it might be highly sensitive, probably valuable to just take the quiz from that perspective as well, because it really does make a difference when you just know, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, you can find the quiz in addition to the URL. You can also find that and a lot of other resources to support at www.businessmiracles.com.
And then social media, where can people find and follow you?
You'll mostly find me on Instagram and LinkedIn and a little bit of Facebook. And you'll never find me on the overwhelming sites like X and, anything else that's like too much informational.
TikTok. There's so many. I know. It's like so hard to keep up and to stay. It's like posting to a million places. Well, Heather, truly, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful our paths crossed, and the wisdom you shared today is just incredibly invaluable. So thank you for being my guest and sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you so much. I love what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's such an important topic, and I'm honored to be part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And oh my goodness, you guys, what an incredible episode. I think I'm going to have to re-listen to this one myself a few times. So much great information. And as you guys know, with this podcast, my goal is to ensure that you guys are getting not just information that will help you navigate your life, but ultimately Sometimes our pauses come in ways that the universe knows is in our highest and best and isn't always in the way that we hope or envision it to be. But yet on the other side, what we create is incredibly magical and can help so many other people. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Don't forget to also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Wendy Page Sterling. Thanks for tuning in. Sending you all so much love and light as always. Mwah. Bye, everybody.